What's happening, everybody? It's your man damednydc. Two mics up, and we live tonight, y'all. And you know, been kind of throwing this idea around. Tonight's conversation prior to actually meeting tonight's guest, and my wife and I talking about how seasons change now, and getting a little bit older, and you get up and it's dark. For those who are returning to and from work, it's dark outside. Come home is dark. Just the whole thing. And then you're noticing that your mood has changed, or you're feeling your moods are changing. Um, but then there's another side to this that really accentuated tonight's conversation. I had the pleasure of being at the Business Crossing Network's first annual event in August. And might as well say tonight's guest, I mean, literally was my table mate, as she literally was within arm's reach of me, as we, networked and got to know each other, and we talked throughout the day. And, my wife and I were there, and this really great conversation. And what she's doing here in the DMV area is really amazing. And it's really deep when you kind of start tying in all of these things that we're going to be talking about tonight. So you probably are wondering as I'm talking, okay, well, damn, I see you talking. I see you talking about tonight's guest. Well, I'm going to do you one better. I'm going to bring tonight's lovely guest to the stage. It's a pleasure. I'm going to stop and I'm going to bring her out. Uh, Ladies and gentlemen, please say hello to Sultana Karim. She is an amazing individual. Sultana, I've talked enough.
Okay.
I've talked about how we've met, but
Yes.
take a moment, introduce yourself, give us a little background about yourself, and really, what was that thing that got you started in your practice and what you're doing?
Okay. Yeah. So hi everybody. My name is Sultana. I am from New Jersey, but I currently live in Woodbridge, Virginia, with my spouse, daughter, and cat. I've actually been in the mental health field for over 10 years, maybe a little bit over like 11 or 12. Um, I'm a licensed counselor in the state of Maryland, Virginia. I'm a certified perinatal mental health professional and a certified clinical trauma professional. And so in my 10-ish or more than 10 years experience in mental health field, I've worked with a lot of like children, adolescents, and adults and families on a variety of mental health issues. And throughout my experience, I found the niche of like working with domestic and sexual violence survivors. And then when I became a mom, I struggled with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders in pregnancy and postpartum. And that kind of like segued into my work today, because I felt like there wasn't a lot of mental health professionals that specialized in perinatal mental health. But also, there weren't a lot of people of color either, so they couldn't relate to my experiences. And I was like,
Mhm.
I need to do something. I have this experience personally and professionally, and I need to do something about that.
That's very, I mean, that's very interesting that you talk about that in a sense, and I think we touched on it briefly while at the conference. You
Mhm.
know, as a man, we don't really. When I think back of it, we don't really understand, and we don't. I think we don't really know or have the tools to understand what it is. But before we really dive into that, I have to ask for you what is the difference between perinatal and maternal? I think that's probably a good place to start.
Yeah. So maternal refers to mother postpartum, whereas perinatal is like a time period. So it's from conception to after birth and postpartum period. And it tends to be, so you'll hear me throughout our conversation, I will prefer to use the word perinatal because it's more inclusive of anyone who has given birth or within the perinatal period.
Mm. Okay.
But I will
So,
also go back and forth too with mothers. So I will sometimes use mothers and dads and partners. Um,
so what was it then? I have to ask then about your experience. Um, now being a counselor, like
mhm,
taking from your experience and
mhm,
now dealing with your clients and people that you've been dealing with. How was that? Like, do you feel or do you find a lot of times you're talking from your experience, or like is it a meeting in the middle where you and your patients kind of have like that aha moment where it kind of like help break the ice where they realize, okay, she really understands me, she really gets me, and is that part of the process to help continue through the counseling and through the therapy process?
mhm. For me, it's a combination of both personal experience and professional. Um, so, depending on the circumstances, and if they look through my website, I
Mm,
do disclose that I have experienced perinatal mood and anxiety disorders and perinatal loss. So sometimes they want to talk about that. Other times they just want to know, like, is are they alone in this? And
mm.
I'm like, no.
Right, right, right.
Is this,
Eh,
am I the only person experiencing this? No. And so I go over, like, the predictors and risk factors of perinatal mood and anxiety disorder and educate on perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, because oftentimes, like, providers will say, like, oh, postpartum depression, but
mhm,
it's so much more than just depression. And
mm,
educating clients and people in the community and mental health professionals on the spectrum of illnesses is so important.
mm. And I find that interesting that you say that because the and I don't want to make it a negative thing, but do you find that there may be a lot of mental health professionals who just don't have the tools, I guess, necessary to really help those out there? Because it's sometimes really, from personal experience, I've had a hard time finding a counselor with things I dealt with. So is it the same in your field as well?
Yeah, yeah. I think
Uh huh.
there's so many in terms of, like, pregnancy and postpartum. There's so many nuances, and
Mm-hmm.
if the person's not specifically trained in this working with this population, they're not going to pick up on all of it. And certain
Mm,
interventions may work, some interventions not, and some of the diagnoses will present a little differently for a pregnant and postpartum individual versus someone who's outside that period.
hmm. So that's interesting. And again, I'm sitting here, I'm trying to take this all because this is very fascinating to me. Like I said,
Yeah.
as men, like I think men don't really have the opportunity. I don't want to say, I don't even know if it's opportunity, really understand the importance of a conversation like this.
Mhm.
I think the other side of this, my wife and I were talking how women carry so much of the weight and the burden of just about everything in day-to-day life, and then you throw in pregnancy and everything else. It's very difficult, and men, we don't really understand like the whole hormonal change and everything else that comes with it. So I want to jump in, and I want to take my, if I can be maybe dig in a little bit deeper.
Yeah.
So, and I want to make sure I'm saying this correctly. What is PMADS,
Yeah.
like
PMAD.
specifically?
Yes.
PMAD, yes, okay.
Yes. So PMAD stands for perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. PMADs are common, actually more common than people think, and it's the number one complication in pregnancy and childbirth.
Mm,
The statistics say, like, 1 in 7 birthing people will struggle with perinatal depression. Um, Perinatal anxiety and depression will affect up to 41% of people in the general population. But then, if you break it down by race, so Black and African American people will experience it with 44% of the time, as well as 40% for Hispanic and Latino people. And
mm.
actually, death by suicide, homicide, and overdose are the three common cause of perinatal death within the first year of childbirth.
Oh wow. And,
Yeah.
and that sounds like, so again, nothing against our our white counterparts or our Asian any other race or
Mm-hmm.
culture. Why does it seem like the numbers? I mean, is it the healthcare or access to health in Medicare for people of color, or because even like I just have to be honest, some of the things that I even hear or I've experienced going to the doctor or
Yeah.
watching my wife or my daughter go to the doctor, doctors talk to us as if like we don't understand pain or what's
Mhm.
wrong with our body,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
And it's like sometimes they talk to you like, oh, it's nothing for you, but then in the same breath you can hear them talking to another patient that's not a person of color,
Mhm.
and it's like this dire emergency. And like I'm just wondering, like, what, like, from your perspective as a counselor watching this or seeing this, I'd like to, I don't want to get your opinion, but I want to get your opinion. Like, what do you think that is, or why
Um,
that is?
yeah, I think it's a multitude of a lot of different things. So it's like social deterrence of health and access to care, the population, the neighborhoods we're in, economics, all of those things. But I think what penetrates it is um, racism and oppression.
Mm. I mean, that, look, they can't get
And
no.
this history, like of our the medical history in the United States, we experimented, for example,
Mm,
reproductive health. Like we
mm,
experimented on Black slaves,
yeah. Yeah.
and that was the development of OBGYN services.
Oh yeah, you're talking about Lax, Henrietta, that was the sister's name. That basically all of our uh shots that we get, like geez, it just slips my mind, but like polio virus, the vaccines
Yes,
were taken
key
from this,
experiment,
yeah,
like this.
Tuskegee and all of
Mhm,
those things. Yeah, it just, you hit it on the head.
mhm.
Man. So I want to progress then too. So we talked about PMADs, but then there was something else in our conversation and reading up. You talked about also. So what is baby blues?
So baby blues. It is a common occurrence. It affects about 85% of birthing people about 72 hours after childbirth, and usually resolve itself within 2 to 3 weeks. A person may experience like emotional roller coaster of feelings, so they may have up and down days. They may be anxious, but then also experience some sadness, loneliness. They have unsettling feelings and experiences, but it doesn't interfere with their ability to function.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Often people say, like, oh, baby blues is a mild form of depression. No, it's not.
Hmm.
um,
Okay.
yeah, it is not a mild form of depression. It's a normal occurrences during transitions from
Hmm.
childbirth to postpartum period. It's also not a disorder because often people are like, oh, it's major depressive disorder mild. No, it's not.
Okay. It's something totally all to
Major
itself.
depressive disorder is different because baby blues is not a disorder at all. It's just a normal transition that
So when
occurs.
when you say transition there, and again,
Mhm.
being ignorant as a man,
Yeah.
when I hear transition, so I think, is that like from, because I think back when I think of my wife and so many other women,
Mhm.
you've carried a person for the better part of 9 months. So that baby is like that transition now, that, and this is how it plays in my mind anyway.
Okay.
Now that physical uh childbearing now is gone, uh and I guess there's a blues now because you've become so used to feeding, and now the actual physical baby is here.
Mhm.
And that's how I play. So, and is that an interim? Because you said it's a short period of time. It's like, 3 or 4 days.
Yeah. So yeah, baby blues occurs about like 72 hours after childbirth, and it's a combination of things. It's the physical act of laboring and delivering baby, but then it's the emotional aspect. There's
Mm,
also
mm-hmm,
the social aspect and relationships with yourself, your partner, baby. All
mm.
of those combined together is what the transitional period is. And
Yeah,
oftentimes, like, they may experience all of these different symptoms. If it lasts 2 to 3 weeks, it's normal. But anything beyond that, that's when we go into perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, and we need to assess
gotcha.
if what they're experiencing, let's say they're experiencing depression and depression continues on, let's evaluate PMADs. Or if they're experiencing what's sometimes also they experience anxiety and depression at the same time, let's
Hmm.
figure out what it is and reevaluate.
That's interesting because I never really. You don't think about. You mentioned something about, like, it's kind of like you're evaluating yourself, like as a woman, like now you're looking at yourself differently, and
Mhm.
um
You're
it,
different.
and I'm playing it back in my head because
Hmm.
now when I see it, like as a man, not to say like I'm looking at my like, yeah, what the hell is your problem? But like, what's your problem? Um, it's a whole transformation, really.
Hmm.
And then, like you said, then I'm thinking about when we would go out and the social interaction, or I guess her reintegration now into society with this baby. With
Hmm.
me, I'm getting the pats on the back and oh, hey, great job. Yeah, she's getting the congratulations too, but I guess there's a reality shock here
Hmm.
that really sets in. Now I'm thinking about there's a difference between where I guess reality hits her that she's responsible for somewhere. Me, I'm walking around like, hey, look at me, and this seems to be something that happens often in many of relationships. So
Hmm.
I want to ask then, so you as a licensed counselor, right?
Hmm.
Like, what would your in a situation like that? You're dealing with the new couple, maybe that's kind of dealing with that. What role do you play in helping them? Through your services and what you do on a daily.
It depends on what they want to work on. Oftentimes, when couples do come see me, it's they want communication and connection,
Mm,
because somewhere along the lines they like it because of all the transition, they can't communicate their needs, or they feel like they have beliefs that they have to do all these things by themselves because that's what their mom did, or that's what society is telling them to do.
mm, mm-hmm.
And they're looking at social media because like they're comparing themselves to other moms, let's say, who bounce back
Wow.
to their pre-pregnant body, and they're like, what's wrong with me because I'm not
Yeah.
that.
Right.
I'm not where I was before I was pregnant. Like,
And that's so true because you hear that all the time.
mhm, mhm,
And like I said, man, you're echoing so many things that as a young man, they're like, right, my wife won't tell me, snapping back and getting back into that size 6, whereas a man, like, babe, you look fine. You look
mhm,
good. And you really don't have those tools. We don't have those tools. So like what would be something like, from your position, let's just say, people who are trying to figure out a way to communicate
mhm,
and really are trying to get back to a level of, I guess, prenatal or pre-child. Like how do you help them, or what would like a my wife and I came and we saying, we're terrible at communicating now. Like how would that look or play out, in a session, with you? Because I just want people to kind of, anyone here is listening or watching that's maybe going through this. If we've got a
mhm.
licensed counselor right here, DMV, and what would that look like, in a session, for communication?
Yeah. Well, for both parties, I would recommend that they have their own individual counselor to process, because
Mm,
there is going to be a point of like, how do I break those thoughts of like I have to do this by myself,
right.
or I have to save my family or my wife, or I have to be the protector.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then coming together in couples therapy, talk about like what are the needs that you both have, what are the practical supports that we can put in place that would support both of you and the whole family system.
Mm, that's very important.
Hmm.
I really like that. And
Yeah.
if we can even go a little bit further, then because we're talking about your services, but then I think there's also a side that we don't necessarily look at or really factor in, but the actual risk factors
Mhm.
of PMATs. Can you talk about those?
Yes, yes, I can. There's so many. So I'm going to break them down. So one of the risk factors for PMADs is if they have a medical history of thyroid issues, they're sensitive to like hormonal changes, anemia, diabetes, they have
Hmm.
milk production or feeding issues with baby. In terms of mental health history, they either have a personal or family history of mood and anxiety disorders, or they're using substance or have a history of substance use, or substance use disorder, difficulties with transition, perfectionism, self esteem issues, unrealistic and rigid expectation, whether it's for themselves, their pregnancy, postpartum, baby, their perception of themselves, baby, and family. The other part is trauma history that can also
Mm,
play a role and exacerbate perinatal mood anxiety disorders. So if they experience childhood trauma of abuse and neglect. There was divorce in the family, separation, incarceration, loss of
Wow.
their primary caregivers, domestic violence, sexual
Wow.
assault, systematic racism and oppression. Um, they had a traumatic birth experience, traumatic pregnancy or prenatal obstetric appointments,
Hmm.
reproductive history. We look at infertility, if they had pregnancy loss or infant
Mm.
loss. So, pregnancy loss is defined by having a miscarriage, they had an abortion, there was a stillbirth, or they lost their baby within the first year postpartum. Um, they had maybe premenstrual mood syndrome disorders. They had a high risk pregnancy.
Wow.
Um, there's another aspect of social
Right. Right.
support system. So, like change in relationship, which is often happens, a change in relationship with your partner, your parents or caregivers, or family support. Things change.
Hmm.
Friend support. So, let's say your friends are all single and you're the only one with a baby.
Wow.
That's a
Really?
big transition. Um, or your friends are not supportive as they used to be, or they want to go out and you're like, I have a newborn.
Right. Right. Like, what's wrong with you? What's wrong with you? Right. I got a
Yeah.
baby.
Any like life or social changes, like moving. A lot of my clients also are their military, so there's deployments that happen where
Mm.
their spouse are deployed for extended period of time and they
Right.
don't have that support, or they PCS somewhere and it's brand new, they don't have that built-in support system yet.
Hmm.
It can be lonely and isolating.
Wow.
um, as well as like job and work status and employment. So just depending on where they work, they may not have FMLA leave to be able to
Hmm.
take,
Hmm.
or they have to go. Like I had one client who had to go back to work 2 weeks postpartum because she couldn't afford to go leave without pay,
Wow.
and her
Wow.
employer didn't give her benefits.
Wow.
Um, and then
Man.
we also factor in culture. Sometimes culture can be a protective and religious affiliation can be protective.
Right.
Other times it can be a barrier where
Really?
it puts in, like, for example, I have some clients that say, like, they talk to their pastor or the head of their religious affiliation and they've
Right.
been told, like, oh, give it to God, or you should have
Mm.
done X, Y, and Z. You're
Yeah.
not a
I
good
know what
enough
you mean.
Christian.
Yeah.
Um, and that's a barrier. It's like, well, I believe that God can help me, but
Right. You're being told something
you're
totally
telling me
different.
something totally different of
Right.
what I
Right.
believe,
Right.
and
Right.
it's can create a disconnect for them for their culture and religious affiliation. And the
Jeez.
other things are sleep, appetite are the two biggest things.
I mean, and I, because I just have to say that that just sounds like life, right? Like, for really, at the end of the day, that's just, I'm listening to parts of it. Like, man, that is just life,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess it is. It makes me reflect, just thinking on, we all are really different in how we react to stress
Yep.
and different things, and it's it is somewhat sad when I say, because some of these things are just everyday life that really affects people and really, I guess, puts them at risk for
Mm-hmm.
these things, especially women, and but probably men to a
Mm-hmm. I
degree
think the
as
whole
well.
family system.
Really, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
you find it all the way across the board, mom, dad, even kids, because I mean the kids
Mm-hmm.
are growing up and they're watching this, so I guess
Yep.
that would make sense, and then you kind of repeat that cycle
Yeah.
sometimes or many times.
Yeah. Especially when you talk about untreated PMEDs,
Mm-hmm.
it's costly for us as a society, but it's a
Okay.
multi-generational consequence.
Mm.
Because not only does it cost like us money in terms of increased medical care, inappropriate medical care, child abuse and neglect, discontinuing breastfeeding, family dysfunction, adverse effects on the developing baby. So let's say we're talking about the fetus when the person's pregnant, but then thereafter, because let's say they're not getting the attention or they're not, the parents are not picking up on cues
Mm-hmm.
of just that interaction, that can
Wow.
be detrimental. And even like
Wow.
the risk of untreated PMADs, like affects relationship, it has relationship problems, poor medical care, because they may not go back to, let's say they had a traumatic experience with their OB/GYN,
Mm-hmm.
and or they don't have that trusting relationship with them, they're not going to go back to them 6 weeks postpartum,
Right.
but they may go to the pediatrician's office, which in the first year there's so many different visits to the pediatrician, but they
Right.
won't attend to their own personal health. Or they may not
Wow.
have prenatal care or
Mm.
think they need prenatal care or have mistrust in the medical system and don't get prenatal care.
Mm.
There's so many different elements. So when to talk about like untreated PMADs, I think it's a system
Right.
problem. It's a societal problem that we're not addressing, but it's in front of our faces.
And that's what I was going to ask you though, because you kind of took the words out of my mouth that I was going to ask. Like, so this sounds like it's a systematic issue, societal issue that's not being addressed. And again, not to put you on the spot, but you've been doing this for a little bit. Like, what do you see, or what could be some things that we need to be talking about, maybe as a society or even as a culture, to kind of help. You're not going to change these uh issues overnight, but
Mm-mm.
what could be one or two things that maybe would kind of start, we can use to start the conversation, to kind of get this, you know kind of flowing, so it becomes something that's normalized, because right now it doesn't even seem like it's a normal conversation. So
No.
how do we normalize or begin to normalize the conversation, in your opinion?
Um, First, I think if we're talking about children, like having reproductive health conversations
Hmm.
throughout their life, like into childhood, talk about different body parts, talk about the function of body parts, and then continue to increase that knowledge as they get older,
Hmm.
and talk about mental health
Mm.
too, and how it all plays a role in that. And then our healthcare system, us actually assessing people and having building trust in relationship with people so that they're willing to disclose like, hey, I'm struggling or I feel like I'm going crazy, and then you
Hmm.
can have that more conversation
Hmm.
instead of sometimes like providers will just give them an assessment. They don't know why they're getting this assessment.
Right.
They most likely will not be truthful on that assessment because they may have fears that, let's say you're going to call CPS because they have thoughts of suicide,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
or somebody's going to take their baby from them, or they're going to be perceived as an unfit parent.
Hmm. That's
And then
wow.
even screening the partners, because partners don't even get screened. Like,
Wow.
and the
This
statistics says like if the birthing person or the mother is struggling with a PMET, so does the father or partner.
Wow, man. It's so deep on so many levels. And I just hope that we can help create conversations like this, to
Mm-hmm.
become normal conversations,
Yeah.
that we are having in safe spaces such as this, and make this a normal thing.
Mm-hmm.
Because we really, yeah. Thank you, Coach. It is a needed conversation, and I hope, I see, some people, if you're not, if you don't want to comment, or I get it, but just know that this is something that's needed.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Take time to sit down with your friends and your family, or not even first. Start with your family first. If you feel like you're in a position of need, reach out to someone like Sultana, that is a professional, that can at least guide you in the right direction, and hopefully, like you said, just don't get you screened, but kind of help put you on a path of
Yeah.
a better mental place, and physical place for yourself. I think that's really
Mm-hmm.
important with everything, because we haven't even talked about the pandemic. And since now that we're
Oh
there,
no,
right? So how
it
how
makes
has the
everything worse.
pandemic? Right, right. So what have you seen? Like, what have you seen now with the pandemic on top of everything else that we've talked about?
I would say the first year of the pandemic, it so I work also at Postpartum Support Virginia as a deputy director, and then
Hmm.
we've we've had an increase in warm line calls because perinatal people felt isolated, which we all did,
Right.
and it made it worse because you're in a perinatal period, you just gave birth. Well, let's say in your birthing experience, you were not allowed to have your partner there, so you
Wow.
didn't have support. You're alone in
Wow.
this situation, and now
Wow.
you're postpartum, have a baby. Your plan initially was, let's say, for example, bring family over to help and support,
Right.
or have a doula, or have all these other support systems, and now you're not allowed to have that.
Wow.
So it increased the level of depression, anxiety, mood anxiety
Wow.
disorders,
Jeez.
and then not being able to go anywhere. So you're trapped in the
You're
home.
trapped in the home. Yeah. On top of
Yeah.
all of this now.
Mhm.
Oh my goodness.
And
I can
and
only.
also I've noticed like is there's an increase of people experiencing distress
Mm,
and anxiety about leaving the home because of
hmm.
the potential of, let's say they're pregnant, of them getting COVID and something happening to baby, or
Wow.
newly postpartum, afraid to leave the house because baby may get sick and baby's vulnerable and doesn't
Eh,
have a built immune system as an adult. And so they
I'm
won't
not gonna
leave
lie.
their home.
And again, look, forgive me for judging, but I'm looking at someone that was walking around with no mask on, pregnant, or have had young children walking around with no mask on, kids. And in my mind, I was just like, "Yo, you're kidding me, right?" But again, though, talking about this now,
Mm-hmm.
that could, I mean, it could be stress, or it could be postpartum, or whatever. And again, sometimes when I think back, they may, in a mental space, they may not have mentally been there. And like you said, with
Mm-hmm.
everything else going on, they may have mentally been checked out.
Yep. Yep. And there was a lot of
Listen,
like different things that were happening that first year
right?
of COVID. Like,
It's crazy.
yeah,
Ah, man, this is
yeah.
really enlightening. Right now we're going to take a quick pause for the cause. I want to take a minute to shout out, our sponsors here that have, been a huge help to Two Mics Up. So, ladies and gentlemen, those you in the woods, I see you. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back after this quick commercial break. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back out the break. We've been talking, a whole lot of PMADs, risk of postpartum. We jumped in here to the pandemic for a quick second. Um, but now I'm gonna kind of turn to the anxiety side and get a little bit more specific. With the perinatal anxiety. So, what is perinatal anxiety? Because I know we have anxieties about a lot of things, but that one is new for me.
Yeah. Um, so again, perinatal, referring to the time period from conception to first year postpartum, it composed of a lot of different symptoms. So agitation, irritability, constantly worrying, feeling anxious, inability to sit still, having racing thoughts, confusion, excessive worries and concerns about their health and baby's well-being. Oftentimes they're like on edge and high alert. There's a change in their appetite, whether they're rapidly losing weight or they're excessively gaining weight or eating excessively. They have difficulty falling asleep, staying asleep, and having restful sleep. Um, in addition, they may have panic attacks. So,
Mm,
panic attacks are described as like extreme anxiety, shortness of breath, chest pain, racing heart, feelings of like they're being choked. Um, Hot and cold flashes, trembling, numbness, and tingling sensation throughout their body, restlessness, and a fear of dying, going crazy, or losing control.
wow,
Yeah, and
my
also like with
goodness.
perinatal anxiety, it can co-occur with perinatal depression.
So you get is a possibility of a double whammy
Mm-hmm.
at oh my good.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is why I said, like I said, this is good because, like, as a man, like, because we I don't think men have it to that heightened level at, with women, during their pregnancy. Because a lot of times I know, like I said, I'm just sitting here thinking back.
Mhm.
I'm like, in my mind, like, get yourself together. Like, it's not that serious.
Mhm.
Um, but even with that, so men have and do experience those same type of feelings then?
Yeah, it just
Wow.
looks a little bit different and reports a little bit different than what a woman will report about their symptoms. So they may report like, I feel like I'm going crazy.
Hmm.
Like my world is upside down and I don't know what to do.
Hmm. Wow.
Um, or like I have a lot of thoughts about
Hmm.
something bad happening to my baby or something bad happening to my wife, and I don't like what is happening here.
Right. I
Or
mean,
there's a
like,
change, like some people will talk about, like men will talk about like their libido. They're like, my sex drive decreased and
hmm,
I don't know what's going on with me. Like, what is happening here?
I see. So, man, not the mental, but the mental of the physical,
Hmm.
plays a lot. So curious then, because then talking about all of this anxiety though, like, can this kind of turn into like a psychosis type of thing?
No, perinatal anxiety cannot turn into psychosis. So
Uh
let me
huh.
tell you a little bit about what perinatal psychosis is and like its
Okay.
risk factors
Oh,
to kind of
okay.
differentiate the two.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
yeah. Perinatal psychosis occurs in 1 to 2 in 1,000 deliveries.
Mm,
Oftentimes, postpartum people will die by suicide by 5%, and then 4.5% will commit infanticide.
mm-hmm,
Um, 50% of first time parents and mothers who experience psychosis have no history of psychiatric hospitalization or mental health history. The onset is usually occurs within the first 2 weeks after birth. However, it can
mm-hmm,
occur during pregnancy throughout postpartum. They usually present as like, agitated, very irritable, um, very hyperactive, a decreased need to sleep or inability to sleep. Oftentimes, people report like they have bizarre behaviors.
mm-hmm.
Um, they're paranoid and suspicious, so they may believe, for example, that someone's video recording them, and they may look around the room,
Oh wow.
or someone is doing something that's off for them.
Mm-hmm.
Um, they have rapid mood swings. So they one moment they may be super happy, the other moment they may be either very depressed or have abnormally high level of energy. They have difficulty communicating at times, and it's just because of the increase of paranoia, but also delusions. Delusions is a belief that something isn't true based
Mm-hmm.
on reality. So they may believe that others are trying to harm their baby, or they may have hallucinations where they're hearing, seeing, tasting, smelling, or feeling something that isn't there. So suggestions such as like they should kill themselves, or baby's trying to kill them, or the best thing that they could do to save baby is to kill baby. And for
Wow.
them, it's real. Like they
Mm-hmm.
believe what they're experiencing as a real factual um, situation for them, and they really need immediate attention and immediate
Mm-hmm.
treatment, going directly to the hospital, getting a psychological evaluation. Um, and then I'm just going to talk about some risk factors about
Please
psychosis.
do.
If
Please
they
do.
discontinue mood stabilizers, so
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes people who have a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, they will believe that they have to get off of their medication during pregnancy and postpartum
Mm-hmm.
because of the potential risks. Either it's
Mm.
misinformation or what have you, or maybe there is some medication they're taking that may
Right.
be a high risk for their baby, but they need to
Mm-hmm.
talk to their reproductive psychiatrist
Okay.
and get they may need to change to a different medication.
Okay.
Or let's say they have to discontinue breastfeeding because the medication they're on is helping them to be sustainable mentally. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
they may also have a personal or family history of bipolar disorder, whether diagnosed or not. I've also seen a lot of people who haven't been, like their family members haven't been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, but
Mm-hmm.
they can specifically say, like, yeah, my mother experienced really high states where she felt like she could save the world, and then she was so depressed that she couldn't even get out of bed.
Wow. Hmm.
and do anything,
Wow.
as well as if they had a previous psychotic episode.
Yeah, and that just makes me ask, like, so do are there more people? And I want to say this carefully, but are there more people out here that maybe have had those episodic moments that have just never really been diagnosed, or during the pregnancy, did that really kind of, and I guess, heighten it and bring it out? Have you seen more of that?
Yeah, oftentimes, so what I've seen is that within the perinatal period, the first time a person is diagnosed with bipolar disorder is within this period
Hmm.
because of so many different transitions, emotionally, psychologically, physically, socially, that happens, and it just all at one. Like this first time they had it, or maybe they just had like depressive episodes, and this is the first time they had a manic episode
Hmm.
or a hypomanic episode.
Hmm. That's interesting because it just makes me think too. Also, like, I don't want to liken it to, but like, do we find that more of the people of color are, I don't even want to say category, are medically found to be, or to have, like, a PMAD or some type of anxiety disorder? Because this makes me think of like ADHD, which for whatever reason seems like it's attached to our young boys and girls. And is this something that you find that these disorders may be more moved or pointed at, like, people of color when it comes to diagnosis?
Actually, I would say a lot of the research, specifically in the perinatal and even within mental health, tend to focus on white cisgendered people
Hmm.
and families.
Hmm.
Um, and there's not actually a lot of research specifically. I think over the past several years, there's been an influx of looking at different racial and ethnic backgrounds and looking at how it intersects, especially with the perinatal period.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and even like we were mentioning with ADHD, it's now finding like ADHD can be diagnosed in adults,
Mm-hmm.
in adulthood, whereas
Mm-hmm.
oftentimes it was like, oh, children experiencing ADHD. But a lot of the symptomology, they may have not been caught when they were children, and
Gotcha.
now they're seeing it and they can actually say like, oh, I am experiencing very much of like hyperactivity,
Mm-hmm.
or I have uncontrollable urge of just continuously talking and I cannot stop talking. Or I have poor concentration, or I move from one thing to another and can't hold on to that one conversation.
Mm. Very, very, very interesting. So
Mm-hmm.
then, Sultana, we talked about, our ladies, and I'm curious. So, as a man, and men, who, if you're watching this, or you tune into this at a later date, or you listen to this at a later date, what can men, or partners, support systems, uh what do we need to know about PMADs, and more importantly, what can we really do to help?
Mm-hmm. Oh, so that's a two segue question.
Yeah.
I'll just one part and then I'll just see the part.
Okay.
So what men can do or partners can do is
Mm,
to know that it's not just your spouse partner's problem.
mm,
Um, they didn't make this happen to them.
right.
It is not their fault.
Mm,
Um, I also think that they should have some education about PMADs. So PMADs are common among pregnant and postpartum people, since it is the number one complication of pregnancy and childbirth.
mm,
Dads are likely to struggle with PMADs if moms are struggling with PMADs. Hormones can play a role, but it's not the only factor. There's so many other factors and experiences and history that we need to
mm,
consider.
right.
PMADs can take a toll on your relationship with your partner. So, what are things that you're willing to do to meet your partner halfway?
Okay.
Um, PMADs not only affect the parents, it also impact the development of your child or children.
Mm,
Um, both screening for both partners should be screened for PMADs. Oftentimes, like I mentioned earlier, that for the birthing person, mom, perinatal person, they don't always screen for PMADs, and they most definitely don't screen for partners and
right.
dads for
Right.
PMADs. So if you're struggling, bring that to their attention.
Mm,
And if,
mm,
let's say, it's not working with that OB, you can change OBs. Like,
mm.
you can change midwives. You don't have to be fixated on one.
I just to
Because if
say
it's
so,
not good care, it's not good care. Keep it
and I
done.
think that's something that we don't, and I think we just feel like we owe it to um our OB, as women. I remember hearing the story, being the only male in the house and you coming over with a bunch of women. Sometimes it's just hard. It's hard to find a doctor, and then when you find a doctor, you don't want to let the doctor go. But at some point, that doctor might not be good for you anymore either.
Hmm. Hmm.
So I think that's a very great point. You know your body, and sometimes it's just not working. Go ahead,
Hmm.
warn. So I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you up, but that I just think that that's important. Like you said, you don't owe them nothing. If it's not working for you, go on to somebody else.
Yeah. And if you're not
Hmm.
being heard or seen by your doctor, or they're making assumptions, there's a lot of things I hear with my pregnant and postpartum people. It's like their doctor made assumptions about what questions they're asking, or like, oh, well, I can't tell you everything about my whole career as an OB.
Right.
But trust me, when the person's asking like what to expect when we go to the hospital, or what to we expect from your communications, or what do we expect in this whole experience with you? Are you
Hmm.
going to support us?
Hmm.
Are you incorporating my partner or other support people I have with me in this process? Or are you just gonna be like, well, I'm the OB, I have the experience, and
And,
dismiss the support system?
right, I was just gonna say, and don't dismiss the whole support system. I think that's really key now that we're coming allegedly through the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Um, have we kind of gone back to some type of normalcy where, again, both parents or partners being in the delivery room now? And
Yes.
okay, so okay, so
For the
that part
most part,
for
from
them.
what I
Hmm.
know,
Hmm.
yes.
Okay,
But I
because
can't speak for all facilities.
man, that was a whole lot
Yeah.
to really sit through, and I really appreciate you taking the time out tonight on this first part, because I really would like to come back, because we haven't even gotten into domestic violence
Mm-mm.
and things of that. So what we're going to do, ladies and gentlemen, because I think, yeah, without question, and I know this is one of the deepest episodes and conversations that we've had here in a long time. No, it's seriously. And I really just thought that with like I said, sometimes this the sun, the moon, the stars align perfectly. When we met you, we had already been talking about, kind of jumping back into something. A lot of times with the pandemic, and I'll just be honest, you want to keep things light.
Mm-hmm.
You want to talk about things definitely that, we like to talk about businesses and things that are really making an impact in our community. But I think, not even I think I know, like your service
Mm-hmm.
is a real service that's needed in our community,
Yes. Yep.
especially when we're talking about people of color who have a hard time. A lot of times now, we're looking for service providers such as yourself, who
Mm-hmm.
you're very talented, very knowledgeable, extremely knowledgeable, and that, I mean, that's a huge key. But you have a compassion and a care about you. I think that's
Mm-hmm.
the most important thing.
Yep.
And we needed to dive in and really just take these next 2 weeks, and we're going to come back again with another deep conversation next week. We're going to have Sultana come back, and she's going to educate. We're going to talk about some, another serious matter of violence and domestic violence and things, because men get abused too. And
Yes.
I think a
Yes.
lot of women and men don't really understand that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
And impacts
yes.
the whole family system too. If your
eh,
children is witnessing it, it's going to impact how they have relationships with themselves and other people in their life.
mm, say it. Look here, say it, man. And yes, Jonathan. Yes, not even an awesome presentation. It was an awesome conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Kareem, that cheaters. It was really truly needed. Absolutely, Jonathan. Without question.
Yeah.
But before we go, I do, because so a lot of times, we talk about Queen. Now I do want to go ahead and give you that, because there's what I learned when we met. The meaning of your name.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I gotta get, because I
Yes.
couldn't let it go. I couldn't let it go before we leave. Go ahead, please, everybody. I'm going to give you the highlight. So go ahead and give everybody the meaning of your name. It's different. It stands out. It's unique, and it fits you.
Yes. So my name is a Muslim name, and it means queen.
Boop.
In the
And
male version, Sultan is king.
see, and look here, and that right there, ladies and gentlemen, is just how that goes down like that. Period on that one.
Exactly. Yes.
Period. Period on that one. You know what I'm saying?
Yep.
So Tana, before we close out tonight's conversation, I also, even though you're gonna be back next week, I still want to go ahead and give you an opportunity. Please go ahead and leave your, how people can contact you. If you guys want to go, follow Satana, check her out on the web. If you feel like you need to make you need a consultation, I want people to be able to go ahead and reach you. So go ahead and take a moment to go ahead and what's up, Jeff? How you doing, bro, man? Thanks for joining us, man. Sultana, please go ahead and give your information.
Yeah. So you can find me on my website. My website is www.Karim counseling. I was like, make sure I didn't say too many notes. KareemCounseling.org. You can also find me on Facebook, Facebook/Kareem Counseling, or Instagram /Kareem Counseling. And if you can also contact me by email at skareem@KareemCounseling.org.
We're gonna make sure that we put all of that in tonight's notes. We'll make sure we put that into next week's notes.
Mm-hmm.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're coming up on top of this. Is what happens, man. We have such deep conversation, such true conversation. The hour almost blows by so
Yes.
quickly. So Tyler, I want to thank you again for your time tonight. We'll be back next week, ladies and gentlemen. Same bad time, 7:30. 2 mics up, and we're going to jump into a domestic violence conversation. So tell a friend. Again, we're going to change it up these next 2 weeks. A little deep conversation that's really needed in our community and as a society as a whole.
Yeah.
I mean, this is just really something that it's not a cultural thing. This is a societal thing. And in my opinion, the only way that you change these things is by having conversation. Have a conversation in a safe place. So we're doing it right here on 2 Mics Up. Before we close out, it's my pleasure. Look, thank you for jumping on. I really appreciate you. Cuz, how you doing, cousin Ray? Appreciate you for tuning in, watching. Come on back next week. I do want to say before we go ahead and close out tonight, absolutely, Jonathan, absolutely. A couple of things I want to share that's going on here, 2 Mics Up in the news. Here 2 Mics Up. We're always committed to creating something greater here in the community. We'd like to be that community connector. This part is sponsored by Gentara. Right now, shout out to our season 4 advertising partners. If you're interested or you know anybody that's a small business or a business owner, entrepreneur that's looking to advertise, send them our way. Here 2 Mics Up, we like to help you elevate your brand, whether it be through social media, business promotions, advertising opportunities. For some of you looking to get into podcasting, I'm here to help. And as we close out the month, we're going to be sitting down with the attorney Ebony Vincent, and we're going to be talking about voting. My Balbo. I need you guys to go out and check out My Balbo, short for My Ballot Box. My friends Jonathan and Stacy Celestine will be joining me in a couple of weeks. Look out for that, man. It's going to be a really interesting conversation as we move towards these midterm elections for some of us. This is going to be a game changer, I think, in how we all connect when it comes to voting. And our next generation, this is really all about you. This is an app really geared for our next generation. So stay tuned for that conversation, ladies and gentlemen. You know how we do it this time, though. I want to say thank you for watching. You can follow 2 Mics Up online at www.2micsup.com. You can follow us across all our social media, IG, Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube at 2 Mics Up. And if you're watching this on YouTube, before you go, make sure you go ahead down there and hit that little bell so you can be notified by all the newest content coming to you from me here at 2 Mics Up. Leave me a thumbs up. Drop me a comment. Let me know what you like, what you don't like. And we are here for the constructive criticism. Really appreciate that. And also, ladies and gentlemen, don't forget we are now on Mogul TV, Monday nights, 8 p.m., brand new episodes. And like we always do at this time, stay safe, stay blessed. Mike's out. 007.